This is week 5, and I'll try to make it fast because time is running out, and also I noticed that the pictures are not coming through in the web CD version of the video, so maybe you'll have to go someplace else, or else you'll have to look at the PPTs at the same time. This is week 5 on mirror neurons and on Jerry Fodor's critique of brain information for cognition, for cognitive science. With apes and mirrors, the question is, how come that some species, like chimpanzees, can learn from the correlation between their own movements and what they see in a mirror, can learn that it's them. I don't know what it is that they really know, but they certainly are able, when they see their image, to groom themselves or remove a spot on themselves rather than to try to groom the image or threaten the image the way that other species do. So there's a correlation there. Some species can pick up on it, some can't. Maybe it got something to do with having mirror neurons. This is the picture of the little rhesus monkey imitating the facial expression. So, pardon me, the sticking out of the tongue by the person that's holding them. If this isn't an illusion, it's another form of mirroring, if you like, this time in the form of imitation. Eventually, we're going to be interested in the advent of language and in the role of all of this, if any, in the advent of language. And of course, the fundamental transition in language is a transition from imitation and pantomime, which is simply copying, sensory motor copying of input with output, for which, of course, mirror neurons would be useful. The transition from that to describing and talking about the output, that's not the same as copying it anymore. It's now using gestures not as imitative acts, but as labels, and as labels in parts of labels for categories, and as labels in propositions, which are statements about categories. You put together different categories, you say, an apple is red. That's not just imitation, that's not just labeling, it's propositions. And that's the remarkable and unique property of language. The question is, how do we get from mirroring and imitation to propositions? An old and famous example of mirroring between the sensory input and the motor output is efference copy. The brain uses the fact that it's sent a signal downwards to process the information that's coming in as a result. So, for example, when you move your head from side to side, the world doesn't look as if it's moving from side to side, even though the image on the retina is moving from side to side, because the brain is using the mirroring between the downward command to the eyes to move to the right and the left, and the incoming retinal signal to cancel out anything that's correlated with the movement. So that correlation, it's discorrelated, if you like. Whereas when you move your eye with your finger, the eye does seem to move because that kind of a motor command is not being used to subtract from the incoming retinal signal. Jerry Fodor does in his paper, does a lot of his criticism on the basis of the lack of information about how the brain works, from just knowing where it's working. Where doesn't tell you how something is being done. And neural imagery doesn't tell you, even activation patterns don't tell you how it's being done. But I think Jerry Fodor overstates his case against localization in neural imagery. It's true that it hasn't given us any functional information yet, but it's not necessarily true that it never will. Mirroring is relevant to the analog-digital distinction because, of course, mirroring is analog. So it's the sensory system imitating the motor system imitating the sensory input. The special feature of categorical perception, in which members of the same category look more alike than they look like members of a different category, even when the differences are of the same size. For example, in the rainbow, equal size wavelength differences look bigger when they cross the red-yellow boundary than when they're within the red wavelength region. Categorical perception, one of the theories for the origin of categorical perception is the motor theory, which is a sensory motor mirror theory. that the reason that we hear ba, da, and ga as if they were as if they were very different, whereas different they're actually in a continuum, just like colors, but different examples of ba all sound like ba. They all sound qualitatively the same way reds look the same. And the idea is that it's because to produce a ba, all of the variants of ba, you use your lower lip and your upper lip. That's a bilabial consonant. Whereas for da, you use your tongue and your palate, and there's nothing in between. So there's a categorical jump from ba to da, even though acoustically it's continuous. And your brain uses, again, mirroring. It uses the fact that it knows how to produce a ba in order to perceive the ba, and that compresses the bas and separates them from the das and from the gas. Worf's hypothesis was that language and culture somehow causes things to look the way that they look, but most of his examples, in fact, all of them were wrong. The famous one about there being lots of words for snow in Inuit, and as a consequence, allegedly Inuits see snow in a richer way. It looks more like a rainbow to them, whereas to us it just looks like a wash of gray. That was wrong. It was just because the language has a different way of expressing sentences. It's actually an agglutinative language, and so the sentence that says this is the snow that melted overnight, or this is the snow that fell gracefully this morning, it all looks as if these are different words, but in fact it's just sentences that are lexicalized in what looks like a word to a naive linguist. So there are not more words for snow in Inuit than there are in English, and therefore Inuits don't have a richer snow vocabulary. But there are some examples of Worfian effects that are real, and categorical perception is one of them. Learned categorical perception. Mind reading also involves a sort of a mirror effect, because the idea is that you from the state that you're in and the movements that you make, just think of the chimpanzee in the mirror. From the state that you make and the movements that you make, the angry expression on your face that comes out when you're angry, or the smile and comes out when you smile, there's an analog between those actions and other people's actions when they're in mental states. And so by seeing their actions, you can infer their mental states, because you know what mental state you're in when you look like that, when you do that facial expression or you do that movement. The motor theory of speech perception is a mirror neuron theory. It's based on the analogy between how you produce a sound and how you hear a sound, and it was an attempted explanation of categorical perception, but it was not. It was a good idea, but it proved to be incorrect, because children have categorical perception for speech before they speak, and chinchillas have it without ever speaking. So it's probably just a case of the articulatory system as it evolved taking advantage of sensory differences that were already there, rather than created by motor differences. Saussure drew attention to the fact that one of the important properties of words is that they don't, except for onomatopoeia, which doesn't really count linguistically, they don't resemble the things that they refer to. There's no analog relation, no mirror relation between words and what they stand for. And an important part of the evolution of speech was the evolution from imitative analog gestures and sounds to arbitrary ones. It's arbitrary ones that then become eligible to become symbols in symbol systems, because in symbol systems the shape of the symbol is arbitrary in relation to the meaning of the symbol. That's the passage from the icon to the symbol. The icon is analog, the symbol is arbitrary and digital. And of course, both forms of communication, analog communication, imitation, pantomime, and conversation and propositions are forms of communication, but they're radically different. And it's the passage from one to the other that was the passage to language. And the critical thing is that things, objects, have shapes. And categories have invariants, that is, they're shapes too. I mean, the features of mushrooms that make them edible or inedible are also shapes. I'm using shapes in a very general sense because it also applies to auditory shape and to olfactory shape. It just means the sensory configuration, the sensory pattern, if you like, no matter what the sensory modality is. Objects have shapes and categories have shapes, and the mirror system is capable of imitating the shapes. But language has to go beyond that, has to go into symbols, and yet it still has to retain the connection between the symbol and the thing that it stands for. So shape is the shape of things, if you like. Shape of things is also what Worf was talking about when he was saying that language influences the way, or even determines the way that things look to us, the shape of things to us, if you like. Shape is what this is all about, and it's the passage from imitative shape to arbitrary shape in propositions that's the most fundamental property of language. It leads to syntax and semantics, because of course syntax operates on shape, but the shape that syntax operates on is arbitrary, whereas the relation between a symbol and the shape of the thing that it stands for has to go beyond that. That's the symbol grounding problem, and grounding symbols in the shape of the things that they stand for is what sensory motor grounding is. It draws on some features of the mirror system, but it's not just mirroring, imitation, and pantomime. Shape is also involved in the question of mental rotation, because what the Shepherd experiments show is that in order to match a three-dimensional shape with the same shape rotated and distinguishing it from another shape, one of the ways you can do it is by rotating its shape, again, its iconic shape, its analog shape, mentally. The mirror system can do that, and that's not linguistic, that's not propositional, that's not computational, it's analog. On the other hand, referring to an apple as an apple, the name apple does not resemble the shape of the apple, and even more distantly, saying that an apple is red, not naming an apple a red apple, but saying apple red, goes beyond both shape and reference. It's a proposition. It's stating something which has a truth value, true or false. And that's another world from mirror neurons and analog. Next week we'll be talking about symbol grounding, how it is that we ground the arbitrary shape of a symbol in the non-arbitrary shape of the thing that it stands for through sensory motor categorization.